Hi, Web Design 1 class. It's Mrs. Miskin. I'm going to go over the comments and centering methods PowerPoints today for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the comments. This one is just something helpful if you are making notes. So give me just 1 second. Okay, comments. Comments are additional codes in both your HTML and your CSS that add notes to you or hide code. Let's look at what that looks like. Okay, so sometimes, especially if you have really extensive HTML or a lot of CSS, you want to leave a note to yourself to remind you what you are actually doing. Sometimes you have a project and then it's out there for a while and you need to make notes on it later on. And maybe you don't remember what exactly you were doing in that point. So you can add comments in your code that will allow you to see it. It does not display on the page, but you'll be able to go back in your code and see it and then maybe remember what it was, or maybe you're, separating out, this is my header, this is my footer, just to make it a little bit easier for organization purposes. Okay, you can do the same thing in CSS. The other thing that is really handy with comments sometimes in testing, or maybe keeping something hidden for just a little while, is that anything, whether it's text or code, anything between the open and closed comments is ignored. So let's look at what that looks like in our code. HTML comments. The syntax for a comment is an open bracket and then an exclamation mark. Now we've seen that, we've been using it since the very beginning for doc type. Now for a comment though, after that we need 2 hyphens, okay? So 2 dash symbols. So I'm looking at this right here on the PowerPoint. The open bracket, exclamation mark, 2 hyphens. When you put this in your code in HTML, immediately everything after will go gray. That means nothing after that will be read by the browser. So to end it, then we have 2 hyphens and a closing bracket. Then you should see the code light up again in its normal color. Okay, so in this example, I've got just a note that says beginning of navigation bar. That just tells me that's where I put the navigation bar in my HTML. Maybe I have a really, really big one, or I'm using a navigation bar and a footer navigation in there too, something like that. So the comments help us to remember what we've done or something like that. Now, if we look at this second example here in the unordered list, I have a comment before the LI, and then I end it after the closing LI. So when this is displayed in the browser, that third list item will not be shown. Only the one that says home and about, okay? The ones that say home and about. The services one will not be shown. However, it's still in our code. So I do this when, for example, I have a client who had an annual event. So for about a month, 6 weeks out of the year, this event needed to be displayed on their homepage and a link to, the event page with all the information for registration and so on. But they did it every year. So one year, or one time, the first time I did this, I created the code on the homepage. Then after the event was over, what I did was go back and add comments around the code so that it was ignored. So the browser didn't show that anymore. But the next year, when they had the event again, all of that code was still the same and it was there. It just wasn't being displayed. So all I did was remove the comments, and then I didn't have to write the code over again. Okay, so that's really, really helpful if you just need to hide something for a short amount of time or for a long period of time, and then display it for a short amount of time. Okay, so anything between comments, between the open and closed comment symbols, syntax are ignored. Okay, so just to review for HTML, open bracket, exclamation mark, 2 hyphens. Okay, that's the dash symbol, and then to close it, 2 hyphens again, and the closing bracket symbol. Okay, that's for HTML. The comments for CSS are written differently, but it's the same concept. So CSS comments, anything in between them is ignored. So whether it's a note to ourselves or we're hiding a specific code. Now, sometimes I do this in CSS. If I have something that's not quite working right, and I don't necessarily want to write the code again, that styling code, but I need to see if that's what's causing a problem. Okay, so for in this example, the syntax is a /. So that's the one that is on the question mark key. So same as like a closing tag in HTML, the / and then the asterisk symbol. And that is on the number 8 key on your keyboard. So do a Shift 8 to get the little asterisk symbol. And then to close it, it's the reverse, asterisk, and then a /. So in this example, I'm just making a note that here's the styling for the body of the page. That way, maybe if I have a really extensive CSS file and I forget that I've styled something before, I can go up and see, okay, here's the section where I put all of this stuff, okay? And then down below, this example here, I've added font size 40, but maybe it's appearing too big or too small. So I want to hide that just temporarily, but I don't want to delete it because I might need it later on. Okay. So comments are not required, but they can be helpful if you need to leave yourself a note, or in the other case, if you want to hide something for a specific amount of time. Okay. So comments can be really helpful. I don't require them for your final project, but if you have them in there, it's probably going to make it easier for me to read or for you to read. Reminder on our 3 S's: spelling, spacing, and syntax. So especially remember the syntax for comments because it's different than the rest of our tags. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing that one. So that's comments. Now we're going to go on to centering methods. So we, up to this point, have only left aligned. Now we're going to learn how to center different types of elements. So let's go ahead and start that PowerPoint. Centering methods. The 3 main types of centering, I'm sorry, not 3 main types, but there are 3 different ways. There are 3 different methods to center elements depending on the type of element that it is. Okay, so the first one that we're going to look at is text elements, right? How to align text elements. And I believe that we covered this in our font lesson earlier. So this is just a reminder. On text elements, there is one property that we can add that will align our text to the center. Now that can be used on headings, paragraphs, lists, different things like that. The next element that we need to consider is whether or not it's a block element. And then the third are inline elements. So let's go over each one of those. Text align property can be put in any kind of text element styling. All right, and it's just text dash align and then center. Remember, the default for this is left, so we don't usually need to specify left, but you can do text align right. And I believe that justify is one other one. But just to center text, text align center will work. Now, a little note here. We have list items that are both text and block. So when we're centering list items, there's actually some different ways that we'll need to do them. We'll cover those in our practice pages. It's not super important right here in this example, but just keep that in mind. The list item is both a text and a block element, and they behave a little bit differently. For example, when you center align a list item, so if I had LI and then in the curly braces, I had text align center, the text itself would center in the browser window, but the bullet or the number that's before it will not, because that is part of the block element, which is the unordered or ordered list. So those have to be done a little bit differently. We won't cover them now, but just keep that in mind. Usually we'll use text align for mostly headings, but sometimes paragraphs. I don't recommend that we center a lot of paragraphs, especially big blocks, because that's hard to read since the beginning of the line starts at a different position on every single line. Okay, it makes it really hard for big blocks of text to be read, but most commonly you're going to see that on headings. All right, so text align can be used on text elements. Let's go on to block elements. Centering block elements. Now, by default, block elements take up 100% of the width of the screen. So we learned that when we talked about block versus inline. In order to center a block element, we need to change the width to less than 100%. We can do that two different ways. We'll use the width property either way, but the value that we give it can either be a pixel size or a percent. Okay, so we can do it two different ways. Two different values, either a percent or a pixel width. We also need to tell the browser to calculate the left and right margins automatically. And that comes in handy because when we're showing a, let's say it's a navigation element, the nav, and we want it to take up, say in this example, I'm using 50%. So if you look here on the PowerPoint, 50%. So I want it to take up half of the screen and then the browser to calculate it automatically. Well, what size is the browser screen? I can guess, but I don't know exactly. So if I were to try and put margin left, say 400 pixels and margin right 400 pixels, and the width of the screen was actually 2000 pixels, well, I'm telling the nav to take up 50%, so half. So the nav is going to take up 1,000. Then each of the margins is going to be 400. So that's only 1,800 altogether. So my alignment's going to be off because I didn't know what it was. Now the browser does know what the width of the screen is. So if we put margin left auto, margin right auto, the browser calculates it because it knows the exact width and can calculate those margins for us. This is how I want it to be done. You'll notice if you do this, go ahead and take a couple of minutes and try this out on a block element. It might be easier just to put it on the body to give a width to the body on any of your practice pages or even a tag drills page. And then tell that same element, so the body or whatever you decide, margin left auto, margin right auto, and then see. You can also try out margin left and give it a pixel size and try to make it up yourself and see what happens. What really happens is that those set margins will stay the same no matter how big or small the browser is. So if I were to increase or decrease the browser window, which my screen is probably bigger than yours, my monitor, so I would see it a lot differently than you would see it. But if you use this method where the browser calculates the margins, then it will always be in the center. So please always just use this margin left auto, margin right auto, give it a width, and then that value can be either a pixel size or a percent. Okay, so I'd like you to take just a few minutes now, go ahead and pause or stop the video. Find a couple of your practice pages, one or two of them, get some styling on there, and add in centering for a block element. It can be on the body, it can be on main or a paragraph even, something that is a block element. Okay, so take just a few minutes and do that, and then come back. All right, you should have been able to center some block elements now and see how that works on your screen. Let's talk about inline elements next. So we're going to go on to inline elements. Now, this is pretty much how to center images. The other major inline element that we have is an A tag or an anchor. Usually it's text, so that can be centered using text align. And we don't necessarily center the anchor, but we center whatever element is being anchored, being linked. All right, so we don't normally worry about that one. Just to center block, inline images, we're just going to use them for images. All right, so in order to center an image, because it's an inline element, we need to change its display value so that it actually becomes a block element. Then it can be centered using the block method. The image already has a set width, so we need 3 properties to center an image. First, display block. Now this is different from the block centering, which is width. So block centering, we need a width, margin left auto, margin right auto. For an image, we need display block. Display is the property, block is the value, margin left auto, margin right auto. We can use the width on this also if we need to change the actual width of the image. But remember, the browser already knows what width the image is, so we don't have to specify it. Okay, these are test questions on the CSS test that will be coming up soon. So please make sure you have really, really clearly in your notes how to center a block element and how to center an image. Okay, so just to recap, let's go back to that first that PowerPoint for block. Block elements need width, margin left, set it auto, margin right, set it auto, and the width can be either a % or a pixel size. To center an image, you need display block to change it to a block element, and then again, margin left auto, margin right auto. All right, I'd like you to take some time and center some of your images in your practice pages. Reminder on the 3 S's, spelling, spacing, and syntax. Take some time and center text elements, image elements, and block elements. And that will be it for this lesson. Thank you.